Welcome to my Minecraft Let's Play. Wait, this isn't Minecraft. This is Roblox. What's going on? Oh, okay. So, in this video, I'm going to be teaching you how to make a Minecraft style placement system to almost exactly mimic that game in other voxel based games where you can move your mouse wherever you want, place your blocks, and they'll be placed nicely relative to each other and they won't, mess up, go where you don't want them to go. And they're validated by the server as well. So exploiters can't break your block magic. So this video goes into a lot of depth with C-frames and, vectors, and it's really, really informative. So I encourage you to watch the entire video and enjoy that. And the code from the previous video will be in the description because that is a prerequisite for this video. But make sure to watch the previous video if you haven't to learn how our initial placement system works. But this is a really, really helpful video. I hope you enjoy it. If you have any suggestions, comment down below. If you like the video, and subscribe to my channel. But with that, let's get into the video. So first, we're going to be working with our snappage or snapping to grid to figure out how we can get a random arbitrary point to conform to like a blocky grid as you would see in a game like Minecraft. So let's say we pick a point. Let's start with like 1, 1, like right here. And this point, it's not really according to our grid because we want our grid to be like a 3 by 3 according to our block. And also, as a side note, this will scale to 3D. I'm just using 2D as a vehicle for explanation. Okay, so we have this point at 1, 1, but we need to get it to somewhere like one of these 4 points on the grid. So for our system, I'm always going to choose the bottom left point. So this 1, 1 needs to move down to 0, 0. It has to get there. That's the goal. We want it to move to this bottom point. So how do we do that? So I guess let's actually bring out the numbers so it makes a little bit more sense. So this would be 1, 1. We need to get it to 0, 0. So what we'll do is we'll divide this number by the grid size. So the grid size is 3. So we'll divide it by 3. But you'll notice we get like 1/3 for each coordinate. Oh, 1/3. Ugh. And this is a fraction, which can also be represented in decimal by some, 0 with a bunch of other stuff after it. Well, wait, 3, 3 repeated, I think. Yeah, right. Something like that. I know my math. But this is not 0, 0. It's close, though. So how can we get it to 0, 0? There's a function called floor, which allows us to do that. And by floor, what floor does, like math.floor, it cuts out the decimal portion. We don't care about it anymore. And it moves it down to the lowest value. So this 0.33 just becomes 0, and so we get 0, 0. Now that works. That works great. And you may be wondering, okay, what happens when we have some negatives? So let's go, I guess, to find a new point. Let's do -1, 1 right here. So this would be -1, 1. And when we divide this by 3, again, we'll get we'll get -0.33 repeated for the x, and then 0.33 for the y. And we already dealt with the positive, so we don't really care. We're more interested in this negative portion right here. Now, this is a 3, 3. There you go. So what happens when we floor this? Now, you may be thinking, okay, it goes to 0. But floor always goes to like the lowest value, the lowest whole number. So in this case, -1 is lower than 0. So this will get floored to -1. And that's exactly what we want because now we have 0 and now we have -1. And there's one final step, especially when we get these numbers that aren't 0, is you have to multiply it by the grid size once again. So in this case, it'll be 3. So it'll take our point from here all the way from -1, 1 to right here. It'd be -3, 0. So it'd be in the bottom left. So if our mouse is in this quadrant, our block will be like superimposed here. And if our mouse is in this quadrant, it'll be like here. And if our mouse is here, it'll be here. That's because for each of these, we'll get like the negative like unit value, like -1 or 0 or 1 or whatever. And then we'll multiply it by 3 to get the thing that we need. And then it'll bring us to the point that we want. It's exactly what we want. And one other note is that in Roblox, we don't have to divide and then floor it. There is actually a floor division function in Luau now. So if you take a number like 1 and you do slash slash 3, you'll get 0. It'll do the floor division stuff for you. Okay, so now we know how to snap. Let's go implement this in our little game. So I'm here in the Roblox project, and if you don't know what this is, make sure to watch the last video or check the description for the code because we'll be basing it off of what we did previously. And let's go into placement validator. And in here, we need to define another like global constant. We're going to call this local grid size. And this is an integer, and we're going to set it to 3. And usually, oh, I guess right now, like you want this value to be set to the size of your block. So my block is a 3 by 3 over 3. You want it to be exactly the same. You could hard code it that way, but it's fine just to leave it as a number in case, you have variable size blocks and stuff and like you have to deal with it. But for now, that's what we're going to use, grid size 3. And we need to make a function called placement validators dot or validator snap to grid. This will take in a position, which is a vector 3, and return the grid snapped position. So the reason we're putting this in placement validators is because both the client and the server will have to use this. The client will use this to like render the preview. The server will use this to verify that you're placing your blocks in a valid position. Because remember, we cannot trust the client because they could be exploiting or whatever. Okay, so we're going to return a vector3.new, and I'm going to make this multiple lines just to like give us some room. And what we're going to do is we're just going to do the position, like the component, and then we're going to do the floor division by the grid size. So pose.x divided by grid size, pose.y. Oh, I said, okay, there should be pose.x up here, pose.y is the second one. And then for the third parameter, just say pose.z divided by grid size. So this will always move our, well, after we multiply it by grid size, this will always move our position to a valid grid position. And then we'll multiply it by the grid size to scale it back up again. So we're kind of just we're getting rid of the decimal parts and we're bringing it back up. So everything is nice and clean. And then now we should be able to go to our client placer and implement that. Okay, so first we're going to get the snapped position, and this will be equal to placement. Well, we got to get placement validators on the client side first. Say local placement validator equals require game. Oh, we already have replicated storage. Okay, replicated storage. Wait for child placement validator. Okay, so we have a placement validator imported. We do placement validator dot snap to grid, and we're going to send in the cast dot position. Okay, so that's the snap position. And then since it's always in the bottom left, and we're going to need like a CFrame later, we're just going to make a CF. I'm going to set this equal to CFrame.new snapped position. And then in here, we're going to get rid of the cast dot position, cast dot normal stuff. That was only temporary. We're going to set the preview dot position equal to CF point to world space. And we're going to transform the block template dot size divided by 2. So what this will do is it will offset our block by half its size. So it'll move it from the bottom left corner to the center of the block because we're traversing like half of each component upwards and sideways and other sideways, and we'll get to the center. And if you don't know how this all works, I have a video on object space and world space. Check that out. So it's basically the same thing as saying snap position plus size divided by 2 at this point in time. Later, the C-frame is going to change and it'll be useful. But for now, this should work, hopefully. Yeah, okay. So everything snaps pretty normally. And if you like really try and like trace out your mouse around the corners and stuff, it does kind of adhere to it pretty well. And even if you kind of walk around, like I'm probably crossing 0, 0 at this point, and everything still seems to work exactly as you expected. So that's snapping done. But snappage is only half of it because there comes issues when you try to place blocks on other blocks or on walls or on like sideways angles. So you have to handle those in, kind of a unique way. So let's say you try to, you click here on this little spot. This is a wall, by the way. This is the floor. Handling the floor is pretty trivial. We already did that, but the walls and stuff are pretty tough. So we're gonna use this as an example. So this is our wall. This is the point that we click. And I know this is not to scale, but like these are like the 4 valid grid positions that we can like go to. So according to our previous logic, we will like move this little point all the way to this corner, and this will be where it starts. But then the block will kind of grow. It'll grow out like this way. This is a bad drawing. But like imagine like growing behind the wall, because remember how we said this is the bottom back left corner? It'll grow like away from us. It'll grow like that way. So if like this is us looking at the wall, it'll grow like past the wall. We don't want that. We want the block to like, spawn in like against this wall in this grid position right here. Like this one right here. So the way we do that is we have to like define a relative like coordinate space. This is going to be using C-frames. So we're basically just going to define the directions in which we want like up, down, left, and right to be, and spawn our block in that way. And I'm saying like the block will grow because the way we defined our block like offset placement function, we're taking that C-frame and we're kind of just moving it in that direction. So like it's moving along like the primary axes of the C-frame. So let's do that. So what we have to do here is we have to get the direction between our actual clicked position and our snapped position. And we have to first define our space relative to the normal of the plane. So for example, the normal here would be, oh shoot, the normal here would be like out this way. This would be our normal vector, and this would be the forward direction in our C-frame. Actually, this is a bad drawing of the normal. It would be like this way. No, it would be a little higher. Sorry. I'm trying to get this right. Yeah, that's about right. Okay, so that's our normal vector, and so that's like protruding from the wall, facing away from the wall. And in here, we want to move all of these positions relative to this normal vector. And we could do that in the code. And then all we have to do is get the vector from our point to the snapped point. Get it like right here. And then we have to get the components of that. So we'll get the x or relative x component and the relative y component. And then this will kind of point us in the right direction. So if you look at this, you see how the normal faces this way, the x faces this way, or this is the y, I guess, and the other coordinate place is this way. You don't know whether it's going to be x, y, or z until you actually do it. That's why we're doing relative space. You'll notice that this coordinate frame looks like this. And if you were to imagine the block growing out of these three axes, it would move out towards you in this kind of section as you would expect. So the whole goal here is just to get our 3 axes pointing in the right direction, and then the rest of the code that we wrote will just kind of like move the block. It'll move it, transform it a little bit this way, and then a little bit up, and then a little bit. Oh, this is a horrible drawing, but you get the idea. It'll transform it in the 3 axes and kind of like grow out of it. And the only thing we have to do is get like the vector between them and the components. So let's actually do this in code now. Okay, so back in Roblox, all we need to do is go into the client placer because there's nothing to validate here. This is just to like assist the client so they actually place the stuff where they intend to. And now we're gonna move the C-frame down because we'll have to change it in a minute. But we want to first get the normal C-frame. So this is the C-frame relative to our normal vector on the surface that we're on. And for that, we're going to use cframe.lookalong. Look along, I don't know how long this has been around. I just saw it the other day. It's a very useful method because we can create a C-frame at a position and it can look along a certain vector. This differs as opposed to like look at, because look at looks at a position in 3D space. Look along uses a direction. Cast.normal is a unit vector. I think it's a unit vector that is in the direction of the normal face of the part that we're looking at. It's not a position. We could use cframe.lookat and do cast.position plus cast.normal, but this is simpler, easier to look at, whatever. So this will basically make our negative z axis the cast on normal. I'm pretty sure that's how it works because the Z is the lookout. I don't know, something like that. So all we know is that this cast on normal is relative, or this normal CF is relative to the cast on normal. And now we need to get the snap position relative to this new C-frame. So we're going to do relative snapped equals normal CF point to object space. So we're converting a vector to a, well, we're just a vector to a vector, but we're like redefining it in terms of having that normal facing forward. And we're going to use snap position in the parameter. So now this is the relative snapped. And what this allows us to do is it allows us to access the components of this vector in such a way that we can do it at the same time every time, regardless of whether it's X, Y, or Z. Because if it were in like normal world space, you wouldn't know which axis to choose. And like you could do some complex conditional logic to figure that out, but this is just easier in my opinion. And you'll notice we're not actually using any vector subtraction to get the difference between them, like I showed in the previous clip, where I was like drawing the line, because that's usually how you get the point or the vector between 2 points. But keep in mind that cast opposition in this normal CF is the origin. So where we click is the origin. This snap position is relative to that. So it's technically in world space, it's snap position minus cast opposition. But we're using point to object space just to make it more clear what we're doing. So this is kind of like the line that we need to split up the components of. So now we're going to say local x vector equals normal CF. We're going to use vector to world space. This rotates a vector. It doesn't actually like transform it at all. It just rotates it according to the new C-frame that we're using. And we're going to take the vector 3 dot x-axis times negative math dot sine relative snapped dot x. And what this does here is in our little explanation, notice how the vector we're isolating from the orange point down to the snap point, it's facing this way. And so the components would also be facing this way, which we kind of don't want. Let me get that. So they'll also be facing this way. So we use a negative sign to like flip them. So the negative sign would flip them and they'd be like this now, which is what we want. We don't want it facing that way. And that's what we use the negative sign for here. And then the math dot sign is finding the like relative snap position, because depending on where the point is, it kind of gives us the direction in which we want to go. So that's why we're taking the sign of the relative snap, because it gives us the direction in which we want to place. Because when we place on like different points in the wall, we need to know which like direction we should be pointing to, and that's what this gives us. So we need to do that for the y vector as well. So local y vector equals normal CF vector to world space, and we're going to do vector 3 dot y-axis times negative math dot sine relative snapped dot y. So this is the same thing just for the other axis. Now, you'll notice that like we're using x vector, y vector, kind of weird names. That's because the C-frame function we're going to use to actually generate the C-frame is going to be C-frame from matrix. So this will take in the position at which we want to start, which will be our snap position, then the x vector, which we're going to use x vector for, and then the y vector, which we're going to use the y vector for. And then as for the z vector, we're going to use cast on normal. So these are the 3 directions in which we want our entire system to kind of be based around: the x vector, y vector, and cast on normal. And then this can stay the same, because all we're doing is we like transformed world space to kind of like be so that like if you're the code, if you're this line of code right here, all you know is like you treat this kind of surface as the ground. This is your ground, not this. It's this. This is the ground. So that's the ground to you. And then all you do the same like point to world space thing, but this time it's kind of more relative to that point. So let's run it. Hopefully it works. This was a lot, and I will show you a way to kind of like reason through this a little bit better. So you'll place it, and you'll notice everything works well. The blocks are pointed on the wall properly. And I guess if you didn't think this like did anything, then try like disabling what I just wrote, and then try placing blocks as well. So this works in all directions, going everywhere, and it does exactly what you would want it to do. So I'm here in my little test world where I actually made this project for this video to show you a helpful tool in understanding this C-frame magic that I just imposed upon you. And that's using like visuals in game to kind of indicate the directions of the C-frame. So you see here, the yellow, red, and blue axes are like all the Y vector, Z vector, and X vector of our C-frame. And as I move my mouse, you can see how they're changing and how they're adapting to the environment and how they move around. And the little blue dot is the snap position. And you can just see how everything works together and how it all works. So I'd recommend doing something like this. And also, you'll notice in the back, I have little indicators for the X, Y, and Z axes, like the origin and stuff, to test like across negatives and stuff. And to do that, you can go to view and then where is it? It's in show grid. Yeah, click show grid, and then you can get those axes, which is cool. So all I did is I have a couple parts, and they have their pivots set to like one edge. So you see how the pivot is at the very back. Then on my code, the same exact client place. The variables might be a little bit different. I just I pivot them to the C frames, and then they're at the position and they're looking at the next position, and that's all I do. And the P is like the little blue dot. Where is it? Where is the pose? It's like this little blue dot here, so that one moves around as well. So I would recommend doing this if you're kind of confused and you kind of want to understand what I'm doing, and like play with some of the values to see like what happens. Like maybe flip the negative sign, or try to leave it in global space, not convert it to the normal CF, and see how things change. Because this took me many hours to figure out, even though I actually know linear algebra now, so I have no excuse of just like, you know, like dealing with magic, because I actually know the magic, what it means now. So it's complex. Don't get worried if you don't understand it. You'll figure it out. So there's one last thing we need to do before we call this project done, or at least for now. And that's the server validation. Because right now, if you can like cheese the system. Let me see if I can show you. So obviously, other than the fact that you can like just send bogus coordinates to the server and it'll just trust you that you're on the grid system, if you like kind of like, move like spam it around or whatever, you can get stuff that's like not aligned. I guess I didn't hear. But like you can get stuff that's not aligned, and you don't want that. Okay. So let's go into placement validator, and we need a special function to validate the like gridness. Like, is it grid worthy? So we're gonna do function placement validator dot is within grid, and we're gonna take the position, and this will be the position that the client sends to the server. So keep in mind it's already transformed by the, you know, by the object, like by the block 10 byte dot size of by 2. It's already transformed in that direction. Now obviously we don't really have to like transform it. Like, it's fine. We could send it to the server and save it. But like, just to, make it simpler for the client, we can do all the processing on the server and say local block pose equals placement validator dot snap to grid, the position, and we'll add vector3 dot 1. And this is just 111. It's a shorthand for vector3 dot new 111. And we're going to multiply this times the grid size divided by 2. So in the same way as we over here, we multiply it by the block dot size divided by 2. We're assuming the grid size is the block size, and we're kind of like we're snapping it to the grid, so it'll be the bottom back left again, and we're gonna multiply it forward by 1, and we're just trying to get it in the right position, and then we're gonna return block pose fuzzy equal position. So fuzzy equal is just a vector function that kind of checks if they're mostly equal. Like, because obviously when we're dealing with floats in 3D space, the coordinates aren't always going to be 100% equal. But if they're within like, you know, like a thousandth or something, like it's good enough. We can just place it. Like, it doesn't really matter that much. And here, this is all we're doing, just to like transfer it to the right position. And I think that's really all we need for this. So now let's go into the server placer. And all we need to do is we need to do if not placement dollar is within max distance, or not placement validator is within grid position, then return. So if this is false, then we would just return. So that should be everything. This shouldn't really change the functionality. This is only like anti-exploit practice, and and such. So everything should be good. Obviously, as I just demonstrated there, you can still like kind of phase into the ground, which is not good, but you can that's a pretty easy fix if you really want to, figure that out. But yeah, this is the client placement and the server placement and the whole grid system done, making Minecraft style block placing a breeze. So I really hope you enjoyed this video. This is a really fun project to work on, and I'm going to be making another placement video series as well because doing like these kind of placement systems are really cool. They're also really tough and test your C-framing ability and vector and 3D graphics and all that stuff. So I really hope you learned something and I hope you enjoyed. And make sure to take some time playing with the intricacies of this C-frame stuff that we're doing here because I feel like you can apply this knowledge to a lot of different projects. But like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. And with that, I hope you have a nice day and goodbye.